all that coke, booze, smoking just stopped. And not only did it stop, but all the desire for it left me in one hit. Cocaine addiction, I tried to stop before. It just stopped. No more cocaine, no more booze, no cigarettes, no spliff, no porn, nothing. It all stopped in one go. There's no strength of willpower or determination, and I've never been tempted to return. Never. So how does that happen?
Welcome, everybody. This is Simon Gilbert with Inspired. I'm really excited with our guest this week. We were on holiday together in the summer at beautiful, gorgeous Lee Abbey in Devon, and I heard Lewis's story and it blew my mind. It was a massive encouragement, I'm sure will be for many of you if you've been praying for a long time for someone you really love who's not making the best choices, to see the incredible way that God broke through into his life. Anyway, if you're new to Inspired, it is about encouragement. It's about stirring faith. We're bombarded with loads of rubbish and bad news, and this completely counteracts this as we meet different people week by week who I've come across, friends, and I love the variety of people's stories. So welcome, Lewis Lewis.
Hi, Simon. Really great to be here.
Yeah, fantastic. You're All Souls Langham Place, and close mutual friend Rico Tice there. He's been on the podcast, and yes, I know he's interviewed you also at church there, because it's such an edifying story of hope where things might not have been very hopeful for those who cared about you. Listen, tell us about your background, brother.
Yeah, I've just turned 62, and I was born in Belfast. And when I was around 1 year old, my parents moved over to Canada, and I stayed there till I guess almost 8 years old. Mm-hmm. We were in Winnipeg, Manitoba, and so I mostly remember just extreme weather. Mm-hmm. Pretty good memories of school, playing in the snow, looking for grass snakes, that kind of thing. And then in May '69, so I was almost 8, and we moved back to Belfast, and that coincided with the period known as the Troubles, which actually started in August '69. So basically there was this transition from, snow and freedom of Canada to kind of rain and war of Belfast. And I was plunked down in the kind of epicenter of that, which was a place called Brookmount Street on the Shankill Road. And if you've ever heard of that place, it was a pretty hairy place to be at the time, during when the Troubles all started up. I was trying to fit in with school and stuff. I had a full Canadian accent, and there were no foreigners around me at all at that time. There weren't any foreigners in Belfast. So the kids in school, they didn't quite know what to make of me and my strange accent, so they called me the Chinaman. Uh-huh. So, yeah, that was my name. That was my first nickname. I was a foreigner to them, So yeah, that's where I sort of landed, quite knowing what was going on. And as for the Troubles, I don't want to say too much about them because it's pretty well documented, isn't it? All I can say is it was kind of pretty scary and chaotic at times. And I can remember things like petrol bombs being made, stacked in milk crates at the top of the street, because there were riots all the time. They just break out, and there's loads to see, There's like buses being overturned, cars set alight, the army coming in with water cannons, firing rubber bullets, It's all kind of exciting stuff for a young boy, yeah. And actually, when I look back on it, I know you've been in Burundi and you've had some pretty crazy experiences yourself, Simon, mm-hmm. And I don't know if you can relate to this, but when I look back on those times in Belfast, it's almost surreal, did that really happen?
Yeah.
You ever get that? And there's this really, I love this. There's this quote. I know you love quotes as well, Simon. There's this quote by Mark Twain where he says, "It's no wonder truth is stranger than fiction, because fiction has to make sense," And that's how I feel about Belfast in a way, It was just, I just sort of think back on it and think, did that really happen?
Yeah.
So weird. But it's just part of life, you get on with it, becomes normal. And that's how it is. But there was, all I can say is there was a lot of violence, and it was coming from like every direction at once. So, you had general boy on boy street violence, which happens everywhere. Belfast people, they seemed to like to fight in them days anyway. They were just, I wasn't into it, but they were. And always was the possibility of literally being blown up whenever you went into town. and the backdrop noise of explosions going off. And I can remember being near some pretty big bangs, actually. And my mother and my sister, for instance, they just missed being killed a couple of times. And then all the shootings going on. So, I mean, just to sum it up, Belfast for me was generally survival, fear, violence, and then religion.
Right.
Yeah.
So what part did religion play then for you and your family?
Yeah, it was massive, Simon, massive. I mean, I come from a almost totally religious Christian background. So my grandfather, he was a pastor in a small church there in Belfast. My mother played organ in the church. It was just a little mission hall with a tin roof, and actually, a corrugated iron roof. And when it rained, you couldn't hear the pastor, sort of thing. Mm-hmm. And so my father, among other things, was a lay preacher, and he spent his time studying the Bible and theology. All my family were Christians. They're really dedicated Christians, not just churchgoers, So those experiences of church for me, they were something I just hated them. I mean, I'll give you an example, Simon. On a typical Sunday, okay, I'd be dressed up in a suit and tie, really embarrassing for a young boy, And then you were sent off to communion service. I was off with my parents to communion, the breaking of the bread, which was like an hour long of just sitting up straight in silence. Really boring. The only thing I remember interesting was this silver goblet filled with wine that went around. Of course, I couldn't touch it. After that, we went downstairs to the main morning service, more boredom, then home to eat. In the afternoon, Sunday school, then home, then out for the evening service. Right? That's 4 church services.
Quite intense.
On a Sunday. Yeah, exactly. And I mean, the only release was the occasional baptism, watching grown-ups being dunked in the water or something, and a testimony. Usually some guy who'd been an alcoholic, living in the gutter, lost his money in gambling, etc., and then seen the light. So midweek, there was a Bible class I had to go to. And at one point, something called the Boys Brigade. I don't know if anyone knows about them, but yeah, sort of militaristic Christian affair, marching and orders and things like that. So basically, Christianity to me was just boredom, It was old ladies and bonnets and really strict behavior. That's it. I mean, the older I got, the more it started to grate on me. And eventually, around the age of 14, I think, I'd had enough. I told my parents, if they want me to go to church, they're going to have to literally carry me there. And that was that. That was the last time I set foot in a church for a long time. And so when I was just before 16 or 16, I got into music. I was playing in bands. Then punk rock came along. I joined a band. I couldn't wait to leave Belfast. I hated it and go to London. And that's what my band did. In March 79, I was 17 years old. And I had a guitar, a small bag, and 70 quid in my pocket. And we all rocked up in London.
Wow. So when God called me to Burundi, I arrived in the country with a couple £100 and thinking, Lord, you better be faithful here, war-torn zone. So you've left Belfast, you're 17, very, I'm guessing, immature, with 70 quid in your pocket, and you're not trusting God, but it was an incredible adventure, wasn't it? What happened?
Yeah, I was really immature, you're right. In fact, I was a total idiot, really. And London in 1979, was a whole different creature than it is now. I mean, some parts of it were almost like Dickensian. So there were 6 of us arrived in a group, plus this really crooked manager we have. And I remember we booked into a hostel room for the night with 3 bunk beds in it. And when I started to empty my little bag, I came across a package at the bottom, which I hadn't remembered packing. And this turns out it was a Bible. Well, my parents must have sneaked in there. And actually, just even speaking about it makes me so sad and shameful. But anyway, I think it's important to say this because it plays some part in my repentance later, I believe. So I took this Bible out in full view of the other guys in the band, and I just kicked it around the room until it was just flittered in pieces, you know. And I remember one of the band members, all non-religious, of course. He was disgusted by my actions, and but of course I didn't care, because I guess this Bible represented everything I was running away from, and it was like this Bible was like a poison to my newfound freedom.
Yeah.
And that's what I wanted, freedom, you know, no more restrictions and rules, no one to tell me what to do. I'm the boss now, kind of thing. And actually, the freedom of London in those early days was really heady stuff. You know, we had so much freedom, in fact, we didn't know what to do with it. Or rather, none of us had the imagination for it, let's say. And so I went to gigs. I went to some gig by a group called Crass. I remember the first gig I went to, and they were anarchists and deconstructionists. I'd never seen anything like it. It was like a seething mob. There were TV screens on either side of the band. They were playing all these images of war and violence and pornography. You know, it was crazy, really scary and exciting. I met this girl, and she introduced me to the squatting scene, because at the time, Simon, there were just so many empty, boarded up properties. Mm-hmm. And like little communities of punks would break in and live there. So it was just like girls, drugs, music, confusion. There were lots of disaffected youth, runaways from home, people who'd been abused, nutters, a huge sprinkling of perverts, and some people that were totally insane. And amongst all that, I met this hot Swedish punkette called Christina. We got married, and it didn't last more than a year. In retrospect, I mean, I told you I was an idiot. I was. And she was just using me to get a visa. So that was that, you know. I had no qualifications. I didn't even have a swimming certificate. So I was just doing odd jobs now and again, building work. I was lost, really. And drugs were a big part of that scene. Hash and grass as a starter. And then speed was the really big one then. Then some heroin come along. Anything you can get your hands on, basically, to change your reality. So that was kind of that early days in London. And I would only go back to Belfast, visit my parents at Christmas once a year, minimum amount of time. And, I was really argumentative with them. I despised them bringing up the subject of God to me, really despised it. I was really vicious in my responses. And one time, I mean, my mother reminded me of this, that I was talking to my father, and he was obviously trying to tell me about God or Jesus or something. And I said to him, if Jesus was in front of me right now, I'd shoot him in the face. Yeah, exactly. I went to extremes, you know, and of course there'd be lots of tears. And so over the years, this hatred of Christianity kind of morphed into total indifference. So eventually I stopped the arguments. I had a really low regard for Christianity, so low I felt sorry almost for somebody who could be so stupid to believe this nonsense. It was like somebody trying to convince me of Father Christmas. And so I banned my family from even mentioning Christianity to me in the early days. And then Christianity completely disappeared from my life altogether. And from then on, there's too much to say, really. There's too many stories. Just wild years, and no point in getting into it. So I think the later part of my life, from about 45 years old onwards, was the time that I got into things that I can't really talk about on the podcast. I'm sorry. And I know you know some of these things, and I would like to. And some of my friends know most of the stories, and my closest friends know all the stories. But my lifestyle wasn't exactly above board. I was doing things I'm not proud of. There were lots of criminal activities going on. I remember I gave my testimony in All Souls I was interviewed by Rico Tice, and I told the congregation listening that if they could think of Keith Richards from the Rolling Stones, then I probably made him look like a choir boy, you know. So the thing about that lifestyle is it gave me the things that I wanted, which were freedom, independence, and cash money. So then I turned 50. I took up classical piano lessons. I was doing that for around 5 years. And so by the time I was 55 years old, I was living this life, a kind of criminal life, but I'd be doing my art. I paint. I'm an artist. I would paint pictures. I'd be playing piano. I'd be going on long trips abroad. And, I spent a total of 3 years in Cambodia and Laos and places like that, for instance. I was free to do whatever I wanted, to buy what I wanted. I had a large group of friends, or so I thought. And life seemed pretty good. I should say a really important thing to say is that my life was drug fueled. So I was addicted to cocaine at this stage. I used to use it every day, morning to night. I would just self-medicate, basically. I drank really heavily. I smoked grass and cigarettes without a break, morning to night, watched porn. That was my life. That part never varied. It was a constant thing.
For decades, you're talking there.
Well, yeah, yeah. I mean, I think in the decade before I got saved, I think that cocaine really came in then, and into my life at least. And so and I was the sort where I kind of I had, moments of just really going crazy on it, but other times I would just keep it level. I mean, I could have died many times. I've OD'd. I've been carted off in the ambulance. I'm really blessed to still be alive.
Yeah, and obviously you must, because you were so wealthy and you didn't get caught, you must have been a really brilliant criminal, because you shared some of the stuff off the record with me, and it's mind-blowing what you could get away with. And normally the story is I was in crime and then I got caught and spent 10 years in the slammer and then in my cell turned to Christ. But that wasn't your story, was it?
No, exactly, Simon. That's right. I mean, I wasn't making tons and tons of money. In fact, if you go above a certain level in terms of making money, it's like sticking your head above a parapet, and you are a target then for other criminals and things. So I kind of kept things on a certain level, but I made my money and I lived like I wanted. So I mean, see, all that freedom, it comes with a whole lot of problems as well. And my main plan for the future was not a house and stuff. My main plan for the future was suicide. Yeah, not immediately. I wasn't planning on killing myself or anything, but it's kind of like my pension scheme was death. I knew that it didn't go anywhere further than that, so I didn't want to. I knew I was either going to get caught or die of drug overdose or something was going to go wrong. I just thought, well, death would be the way. And I'm a complete atheist at this point, so from my point of view, death. It was the end. There was no spirit life, no ghosts, nothing weird, no afterlife, no reincarnation. Everything was straightforward. We live, we die, it's lights out. But what I had a problem with when it came to death was this idea of dying and not having any answers, because I was curious about the world and not even knowing how our story, not just my story, but the whole story of human life as a species was going to turn out. It was like watching a box set, a great box set, and you're on series 7 out of 10, and then it just disappears. I just thought this was awful, that it might be completely meaningless. It was slightly horrifying. Also, the idea of never seeing another sunrise or tree. And then you had these people like Eastern religion sort of people, death is this wonderful natural thing. We should embrace it, this new age nonsense of melting in with the universe and becoming part of the earth again. I just thought that was more ridiculous than religion, actually. And, Tim Keller, that great pastor and writer who died recently, there was a meme going around after he died, quoting him. And I sort of wrote it down because I thought, yeah, that says it. He said, when some people say, well, when you die, it's just over, there's nothing to be afraid of. My response is, well, what you're saying is that death is the end of love, and you're telling me not to dread that? Give me a break. If I know there's love on the other side of death, I can face it. If I know there's infinitely greater love, then I can really face it. But I mean, at that stage, Simon, I had no idea of Christians like Tim Keller or Christian philosophers or anything. I just had this pathetic, simplistic nursery school idea of religion, the silly bearded man in the sky. And I thought I knew what Christians believed in, but I'd no idea at all. I mean, I really had no idea at all. And I'd grown up with Bible and stuff like that, but I had no idea what Christianity was all about. So anyway, that brings me up to late February 2017. At this stage, I'm 55 years old. And then it happened. Then my life changed.
And this, I suppose, is what I just find so unbelievably encouraging, because there are people in my life that I've been praying for decades who are very close. And and some I've prayed for a few decades and they come to faith, and some haven't yet. But what your story just fills me with such hope is how God can just break into any situation. I picture you, are you going to share it on your piano with your cigar and fine bottle of wine and, living the life? Go on, fill us in.
Yeah. I mean, that's kind of about right. I mean, actually, my story is a very unusual story, and I get that. And it's a great testimony to have. But I haven't been telling it to many people lately because I kind of get the feeling it's like a party trick or something that you bring out, and I don't want it to be that.
No.
And, it's very real. And it's not just a great story. It's really what happened. And if anyone, comes to faith just by going into church and gradually becomes a Christian, that's fantastic as well. There's nothing, my story doesn't mean it's anything better than anyone else's. I don't want to say that anyway, but
sure.
Okay. But getting back to the story. So here's how it happened. Really ordinary day like any other. It's February 2017. I wake up, I come downstairs. I was looking at the painting that I was working on, thinking about it. Go into the kitchen, put some coffee on. And then I decided I wanted to play some piano. So I sat down and started going through this really limited repertoire. I'm terrible. I've stopped playing now, but I was terrible at it. But I remember that day was really unusual because I was playing quite well for my level. And also the piano was in really great temperament. And so while I was playing, my last thought really was, I clearly remember thinking this. My last thought was, wow, this is going really well. And then right in the middle of the piece, after thinking that, I just stopped playing. I put my hands flat on the keyboard and I just burst into tears. And I don't normally cry. I do now. After being saved, I cry all the time. I'm trying not to cry now, actually. But I don't normally cry unless somebody really close has died or something truly awful happens. And then I cry only for a little bit, and then I stop. It's like a tap turns off. But this time, I cried for well over an hour, I think maybe an hour and a half. And I've never cried like that before. And I cried so much, in fact, that my eyes were just hurting. They felt like they were on fire. As if somebody poured chili sauce into your eyes. Really painful, really painful. And it was only after an hour or so that I realized what I was actually doing, that I was crying. But not only had I been crying, but also I'd been talking all that time and speaking and saying over and over again, I'm sorry, I'm sorry, I'm so sorry. God, forgive me, I'm so sorry. Please forgive me, God, please forgive me. I'm sorry, I'm sorry, I'm sorry, So you have to realize, Simon, this is a pretty strange thing for an atheist to be doing.
Yeah.
I'm talking to God. I had this image in my mind, and I'm wondering now, does this relate back to me 40 years ago, kicking that Bible around the room? Because I had this image in my head, a kind of feeling that I treated God like an animal and I kicked him into a corner. And I felt, just the awfulness of that, the weight of my actions, what I'd done. It just hit me in this really heavy way, just overwhelmed me, with sorrow. So I sort of came out of this knowing that God exists. There was no dispute in my mind. I went from a total atheist to knowing that God exists. I wasn't a Christian. I didn't think I was. I was just like a theist, I guess. And I was a bit disturbed about it. I didn't know what to do about it. And I was a wee bit embarrassed. I mean, I remember a friend of mine, Max, called round that day. And I told him what had happened in a really embarrassed way, as if, I was declaring I'd murdered somebody. I was sort of saying, Max, something happened to me. I kind of, sort of, in a way, well, I believe in God. and and I remember, bless him, he looked at me and he said, "That's all right, Lewis." He just thought, "Yeah, that's all right. Big deal." And so I was wondering all day, what should I do about this? Should I go to a church? And then I thought, well, why should I be a Christian just because my parents are Christians? I mean, it seems so obvious. Why should I just follow that? And then I remembered my great-grandfather from my father's side, they'd come over from Russians. They were Russian Jews. So I've got that side of my family, and he changed his name by deed poll from something like Cherinsky to Lewis because, there was a stigma at the time of being Jewish. So I thought, well, maybe I can tie this up. Maybe I can become a Jew or a Hindu even, or even better, maybe Eastern Orthodox, because as an artist, that religion had beautiful churches. They have gorgeous icons. And as an artist, I fancied some of that. So anyway, I set about investigating how to become a Jew. And it turns out it's a really difficult process. It's really hard, actually. I mean, you've got to study up on their religion and their culture. You've got to talk to a rabbi. You've got to go to Judaism 101 classes. You've got to get circumcised. Ouch. And then you've got to face a rabbinic court. You got to get this ritual bath, and then you get yourself a Hebrew name. I mean, I looked at it. I thought, to be honest, it'd be easier to get into university or something. So, honestly, it was just so difficult. I was sort of a bit crestfallen, actually. And then Hinduism, it wasn't quite as difficult, but there was this process. And then Orthodox, I just couldn't make out how to get into it. It just seemed confusing. I couldn't work it out. So anyway, I go to bed that night, and the next morning, I wake up with some really odd words just circling around my brain in a loop. And I don't know, Simon, have you ever woken up with like a phrase or something from a pop song?
Yeah.
One that you really hate, and it's going around your head. And you can't. It was like that. It was like these words were on repeat, going round in a circle. There was 4 words: hardening of the heart, hardening of the heart, hardening of the heart, round and round. It was really annoying me, and I couldn't even think what they were, what they mean. I mean, you got to admit, they're strange words, yeah?
Yeah.
It's not like I woke up with something like, Jesus is Lord, or you must be born again. No, it was hardening of the heart. So it was driving me crazy, and I did what anyone would do. I typed it into the Google search bar, and so what came up was some medical condition, but there was also a Bible verse from John 12:40. And I looked it up, and this verse said, He has blinded their eyes and hardened their heart, lest they see with their eyes and understand with their heart and turn, and I would heal them. So I looked at this verse. It was intriguing, and I connected it with the fact that I'd come to God, and I thought, well, there's something going on here, obviously. Why would I wake up with these words? And why would these words come from the Gospel of John? But I didn't understand what that verse meant. So I typed in to YouTube search bar this time, John 12, verse 40. And loads of videos come up, sermons, tons of them, hundreds. So I just started scrolling through them, and I just clicked one, randomly, bang, hit play. And so this sermon, turns out it was a pastor. His name was Steve Carr. He's an old guy. And he's a pastor in a little Calvary Chapel church in Arroyo Grande in California. And the sermon was titled, Why People Do Not Believe. And at the time, this video had like 8 likes or something like that, or 8 watches, 8 views. So it was a really obscure video. And I watched this sermon, and in it, the pastor talked about a guy just like me who'd come from a religious family, but he had no time for God. And the pastor had met this guy. He was a young fella. He met him on the street, and he was sort of trying to, evangelize them. And this young man refused to listen to the message. And the pastor was saying how dangerous it was to hear this message and dismiss it. And he said that if you continue like this, God could harden your heart, kind of put a lid on you and say, okay, we're done. So this news really scared me. I thought, I wondered how this message was going to help me. I mean, had God gone to all this trouble, making me break down at the piano, giving me this dream of these words just to say, I'm done with you? That couldn't be. So I watched all the sermon, and while I was watching it, something just clicked in me. And at the end, the pastor said to his congregation, well, he said a kind of sinner's prayer, or what was it called, an altar call? Mm-hmm. And I just watched it yesterday and wrote down what he said. So this is what I heard. I'll just repeat what I heard. He said, if you're here this morning and you're not a Christian, well, right where you sit this morning, all that can change. All you have to do is call out to him, call upon his name, ask for forgiveness, invite Jesus to come in and take over your life, and he will dramatically, radically change you. He'll forgive you of all your sins. He'll empower you to follow him. Do you want that? If you do, then pray with me right now. Just say these words in your heart to him. He will heal you. Just acknowledge him right now. Say, I'm a sinner. I've broken your laws. Forgive me. Jesus, come in. Take over my life. I want to follow you. Fill me with your Holy Spirit right now and change my life. So I just got on my knees and prayed along with this in my room. And when I got up, it wasn't like, hallelujah, I'm born again or something. I don't know what I felt, actually. I wasn't sure. Something had changed, but I wasn't sure. It wasn't like some great, awakening and light dawned on me. But the next morning, I went to bed. So my testimony takes a while to say. The next morning, just before I woke up, I was dreaming. And in the dream, I was in this space just filled with light. There was no walls, no floors, no ceiling. It was just me, and there were 3 women watching me in a kind of bemused wonder. And I was joking around with them, and I was laughing and laughing and laughing. That's all that was going on in the dream, right? I've never in my life, and never since, felt so much joy. It was just beautiful. I can't tell you what happened. Nothing happened. I was just with these 3 men. I was just wrapped up in joy, and I was just laughing with joy. And I transitioned from that dream of laughing to my waking state on my bed in my room. And I woke up on my side laughing. I actually woke up laughing, and my pillow was soaked with tears. And I opened my eyes, and the light was coming in from the blinds, I remember. And it was an early morning, orangey light. It was beautiful. And I went downstairs, and I walked out onto the balcony, and I looked out, and I just had perfect peace. It was truly miraculous, I was, I'm getting pretty choked up talking about it, but it was like I was utterly in love suddenly. And, so hang on, I have to get a hold of myself here. Anyway, I came across this quote from an American missionary called E. Stanley Jones a bit later that perfectly summed up this moment for me. He said, when I first met Jesus, I felt like I'd swallowed sunshine. And that's what it was like. It was like swallowing sunshine, So that was me. That's how I became a Christian and came to faith,
Yeah. Oh, that's beautiful, Lewis. And so, what were the after effects of conversion? How did you get plugged in?
Yeah, in a way, that's the real surprise, actually, because, I had this honeymoon period, what Christians call a honeymoon period, when God's really blessing you and everything's going well. And that lasted quite a while for me. I'd say about 9 months or something. And I was just so filled with the Spirit. It was just overflowing in me. It was like being young and in love for the first time. You want to tell all your friends about it. You want to bore your friends talking about this girl or something. You notice their eyes are rolling. And it wasn't all pure joy, to be fair. There was quite a lot of soul searching. There's struggling with how it all fits together, trying to understand it. but mostly it was incredible joy. And I think you would know this as a Christian. You realize as a Christian there's a difference between pleasure and joy, don't you? I mean, there's a quote by Malcolm Muggeridge where he says, I never knew what joy was like until I gave up pursuing happiness. And I had done that. I mean, pleasures are obviously pleasurable, but they don't last. And they're temporary. The reason they're temporary is because they're tied into this temporary source. They're tied into you, your feelings, the world, or what, or the drug, or whatever. Whereas joy, this kind of joy, it comes from an eternal source. It comes from God the Father. So it's on a completely different level. You're plugged into an eternal source. And the joy, sometimes it's not exuberant and overflowing. Sometimes it can be just small and quiet. It just sits inside you, and bubbles up now and again, but it's always there, like the mustard seed of faith or something like that. It's just always there. And remember, Simon, I was into drugs, immediate pleasure, all of that. And a lifetime of that just stopped in one moment for me, all of it. I mean, can you imagine that, Simon? Can you imagine that? All that coke, booze, smoking just stopped. And not only did it stop, but all the desire for it left me in one hit.
Amazing.
Cocaine addiction. I tried to stop before. It just stopped. No more cocaine, no more booze, no cigarettes, no spliff, no porn, nothing. It all stopped in one go. Some of my friends would say, my non-Christian friends would say to me, I've got to give it to you, Lewis. Well done for, kicking the drugs. I couldn't have done that. And I had to reply, I didn't do anything. I tried several times to stop, but I never could. I didn't do a thing. There's no strength of willpower or determination. It was literally done to me. And I've never been tempted to return. Never. So how does that happen, Simon? Is there any psychiatrist out there who could take away all your desire in an instant, never to return? I don't think so. That's a miracle. That is a true miracle. And I'd like people to, who don't believe, to explain how that happens. Everything in one hit, and no desire for it, like no hankering, thinking, I just wish I could just have another wee line of coke. No, gone, all of it gone, as if it never existed in the first place. That's incredible,
Yeah.
And then there was like a reaction from my friends. So I had all these friends. And I had some pretty awful reactions from my so-called friends. Not all of them, but I lost most of my friends really quickly. I can't blame them, really, because if it was me, I'd probably done the same thing because I didn't like Christianity, so I can't blame them. I remember one very close friend of mine, when I told him my testimony, what had happened to me, what I just told you, actually. He looked at me and he said, sorry to hear about that. He was angry about it and he didn't want to know me anymore. And then another friend told me that she didn't want my sort coming around her and her friends, polluting the atmosphere, like I'd become some sort of disease. And what made it so awful, though, was I was brimming with happiness. So I was no longer addicted to drugs or drinks or anything, and all that left me. And you'd think it'd be good news, but I guess that didn't matter. In fact, that woman who said, she didn't want me to come around polluting, she did eventually meet up with me. And she actually wanted to know what had happened to me. She's really smart, this woman, really smart as a whip. And she was really grilling me about it. What do you mean? Explain yourself. What do you mean by that dream? And exactly what happened? She wanted to know. She was really at me about it. It reminded me, that time in John's gospel, Jesus healed the blind man. And the Pharisees and the religious authorities were really giving him a hard time, wanting to know how it happened and explain yourself and where is this guy stuff. And then the blind man in exasperation says, look, one thing I do know is I was blind and now I see. There were some pretty awful falling outs, but a few good old friends stuck it out with me. One of them, when I told him the story of my testimony, he listened. And then he thought about it and he said, what's happened to you, mate? You've had a nervous breakdown. So I was laughing because I was saying, well, I'm still having it 6.5 years later. Yeah, but their reaction is understandable because actually I've got to say, I spent almost all my life as a non-Christian, you see. So from an outside point of view, I've got to say that actually Christianity is pretty square, which I accept now, and I even like it. I mean, I'm glad it's not full of hipsters checking out each other's clothes and coming out with cynical comments and stuff. So I'm really happy to hang out with Christians. In fact, when I got saved, I had this intense, really intense magnetic attraction to other Christians. I just had to be near them, and I still do. I just love my brothers and sisters in Christ. I love them. And also, have you noticed, Simon, I don't know if you noticed this, but I came from this sort of dope smoking, get high, talk about trippy things and philosophy and the cosmos. Now that I'm a Christian, Christians are like that. They're happy to talk about philosophy and experience beyond the norms. I find conversations are much, much more interesting now with Christians. The people that you see in the street and you think, oh, it's just some old dear, who's not going to be interested in that sort of thing. But actually they are. They're more interested than non-Christians. So I remember it was a few months in. I got home. I was watching a movie upstairs. I suddenly had this overwhelming urge to pray. So I got on my knees as usual. And I went, you get on your knees and you say, God, Heavenly Father, or Lord Father. But this time nothing came out. I was just held. I was held in silence. Everything just stopped. And I was in a kind of stasis. I couldn't even think about what was happening. I couldn't reason. I couldn't use my words mentally. So I was just being held. And I felt the presence of God holding me still. And it lasted for quite a while. Like God was with me. I wasn't in control. It's really beautiful, very odd, very hard to describe properly, of course. I was just held. Anyway, Sunday came along and I go to church and there was a couple of really old dears, them old Christian ladies with the grey hair that's been permed and they're about 90 and they've got all their finery on. Lovely old couple that I know. And they said, oh, how are you doing? What's going on? And I started to tell them about what I just told you, this story. And I'd only just started telling them. And immediately they said, oh, you were in the presence of God. You're really blessed. And so, nothing is too cosmic or weird or trippy for these old gray-haired dears.
Yeah.
They knew what I was talking about. And they were overjoyed. And they recognized it. Oh yeah, you were in the presence of God. And it was wonderful. Actually, I haven't had that happen quite like that again, because usually my mind sort of kicks in, my, critical faculties, and you're aware of yourself. You're thinking, oh, I'm being held by God, or, God is, but I wasn't. I was just stopped and held. And it was a very strange, very beautiful, very pure moment of meeting with God, without me being in control of anything, and just God holding me. And so there's this connection. It's a couple of years back. I tried my hand as an Uber driver for a while, right? And that was a real eye-opener. I had some really interesting conversations there, and I had some really scary times as well. Like, I was actually hijacked by a couple of big Albanians once, but that's another story. But I'll just relate this one time. It was at night, and I picked up a passenger. She was an old lady, and I had to take her home, and it was about a 20-minute ride away. And so she got in the car, we greeted each other, said hello, and then the whole journey was in silence. And all the time I was driving, I was thinking about the prayers that had recently been answered for me. It's just incredible. I was just thinking, wow, God has answered so many prayers for me. And I was also thinking about the way he does it, that sort of oblique, roundabout way that God goes about things. And I was just thinking how wonderful it all is. So that was my thought process, driving silently. And I pull up at the destination, and I just turned around and said something like, well, here we are, good night. She opens up the door, and then she hesitates, and she says, sorry, I know this sounds weird, but I just have to say that was the best taxi ride I ever had. She said, not only did you get here quickly, and I was driving slow, I think, but she said there was a kind of lovely atmosphere in the car. And I said, sorry if that sounds weird, but I felt I just had to tell you. And I said, oh, thanks. It's really sweet of you to say so. And she said, well, I just needed to tell you. So anyway, good night. And I said, yeah, good night and God bless. And then she stopped again when I said, God bless. And I remember her words. She said, oh, you're familiar with these words? And I said, yeah, I'm a Christian. And she closed her eyes and I automatically closed mine. And she prayed, dear God, bless this man, keep him safe for driving, etc., etc. She just came out with this big prayer, and there I was thinking just before that, how God answers prayers and does things in a weird way. And so she was just praying for me and my eyes were just brimming with tears. When she left and got out of the car, I was in bits. I said, Simon, where else does that happen in that way?
Yeah.
Do Jews and Muslims and Buddhists get that kind of thing happening? I don't think so. I don't think so. I mean, we share the same Holy Spirit. We're in relationship with God, so there's a connection with other Christians. So yeah, it's not an incredible story as such, but it had a real effect on me. It was just so beautiful, like such love in it.
Hi, folks. I hope 2024 has got off to a good start. I think most of you know this podcast comes out on the auspices of Great Lakes Outreach, working in Burundi, which is still annoyingly the hungriest and poorest country in the world. And there are so many positives. I mean, I look back at the last year, see that we've impacted a couple of 100,000 people in a very meaningful way. I've got all these lovely photos of prostitutes that we've helped get out of prostitution, giving them a new skill as tailors. I think of street kids that we've helped get off the streets. Think of microfinance loans that we've given out to the poorest of the poor people, mainly widows who have managed to start up businesses and are now thriving, being lifted out of poverty. Mud huts that we've been able to knock down and build sort of brick houses with a tin roof and a door that can be locked to actually protect these vulnerable ladies. So many people have come into relationship with Jesus, come to faith. I mean, it's absolutely beautiful. In that context, at the same time, there have been 40% food price rises of basic foodstuffs, and there have been 5 hikes in the last 3 months of fuel, which just adds up to crippling inflation that affects everybody. It's so challenging. So if you want to back us, if you're enjoying the podcast, I'd really appreciate it, you sowing into the work. And that's so you can go do that at greatlakesoutreach.org/inspired. We'd love it for you to journey with us. greatlakesoutreach.org/inspired. And keep enjoying the podcast. Now let's get back to it.
And Lewis, hey, I'm itching to hear, your family. What happened? How did they react?
My family, that was amazing. I mean, my father, at the point when I got saved, my father was, he had Alzheimer's at that point, and he was pretty deeply into it. So, you couldn't have a conversation with him. Basically, he wouldn't know who you were, that kind of thing. He didn't know who my mother was, his wife, for all his life. He was in that state. And the shame was that, he wasn't there. In a way, he couldn't know that I was saved because he'd been praying all his life for that. My mother and my sister were just overjoyed, joyed. I mean, it brought us all together. So not only, did I join the family of God, but my whole family, again, just came together in pure love. And we've got a relationship. I mean, it's absolutely wonderful. And I'll tell you, my father, every time I rang up home, my mother would answer because my father, you couldn't get on the phone with them. It's just a hopeless case. And I rang my mother just after I got saved. And my father said he wanted to speak to me on the phone. And my mom said he just wants to speak to you. And he got on the phone and he spoke to me coherently, a back and forth conversation, not just a one-way thing. He listened and he answered, and he asked and listened and answered, and he asked me, and I told him about that I'd been saved, and he was just overjoyed. That lasted for about half an hour in his life, and then he went back to where he was.
Beautiful.
But for half an hour, that's another miracle, in fact, that guy who said to me after I told him my testimony, that friend of mine who said, oh, I'm sorry to hear about that. I told him also about my father and what happened, and he said, oh, well, these things happen. Nothing was getting through to him. But my family, it was a wonderful reconnection with them. And I suppose the other aspect of having this really sudden change, from going from one extreme to another, was how the mind and the body adjust to a kind of radically different life. It's almost physical. You've gone from all that drug and all that craziness to suddenly clean, living Christian. And there was this intense period of dreams for about 3 months. I've never experienced anything approaching them ever. There were dark, satanic dreams, demons, sex. There was everything in there. And there was even, maybe I've got time to tell you, there was this vision of hell. I mean, remember my dream of heaven with them 3 women?
Mm.
This was like the polar opposite. I don't believe I was in hell, by the way. I was in this dream. It was like a vision. I was in this huge chamber, like an underground cave the size of a football pitch or something. And I was entirely alone. There was this feeling of just pure dread. There was no one there, no monsters, no demons, no flames, nothing, just me and this feeling of existential dread and abject aloneness. And it was as if the presence of life and God had just left me. And it was without doubt the scariest dream I've ever had. And I've had some real crazy nightmares in my life, believe me. But this was the worst thing ever. And I remember willing myself out of this into waking life with a struggle. And when I awoke, I grabbed a Bible and I just held it to my chest. You know, it was like 3 a.m. or something. I was really disturbed and I was praying, "Dear Jesus, help me. In Jesus' name, help." You know, like The Exorcist or something, in the name of Jesus. You know, I was too scared to go back to sleep. So, you know, and I'll remember that as long as I live. And it makes sense to me, actually, that hell would be like that. Because hell is a separation from the presence of God. And if God is love, God is life and light, you take those things away, it's just awful. And so this idea of hell from Dante or the medieval artists, the guy with the thorns, the pitchfork, I think it's nonsense. I actually think hell is real. Hell is separation from God, and that is something to be feared. But if you don't want anything to do with God, basically, if you want to go your own way, God won't force you into heaven. He's going to honor your free will and choices. But I never want to experience anything like that again. I think people actually, Simon, I actually think that people that don't believe in God, that walk around and they don't realize that God is here. He's there. Somehow he's still with them. He's still in the world. And if you take that away, you don't realize what's going to happen, how awful that is going to be. So, yeah, I guess that's that. Yeah.
So we're running out of time, Lewis, but, you know, what does your life look like now?
Well, I as you know, I go to All Souls Langham Place, where John Stott used to preach. That's where I met Rico Tice, and I know you've done a podcast with him, so you know him well. He was incredibly kind to me. I'll never forget what he did for me. Really crucial early days. He was always on hand. He introduced me to those courses, you know, Christianity Explored, that he does, which are an excellent way to learn, ask questions, meet others. I joined a fellowship group. I went to Bible studies. I was watching around 4 or 5 sermons a day. You really, seriously, every day, reading tons and tons of books, just hoovering up theology in the Bible. I haven't stopped, actually. It just gets deeper and deeper. So, yeah, it's not great. It's hard being a Christian. It's really hard. I would say
you're paying the bills now, not by selling Coke, amongst other things, but by selling your artwork, is it?
Well, various things. As I said, I did a job for Uber. And I've done various things, you know, so I'm struggling, actually, Simon. I'm really struggling. You know, no more, you know, 100-pound bottles of wine and, you know, big cigars for me. That's gone, you know.
And no regrets.
Oh, no regrets, you know, no regrets. So I would just say, final thoughts. I mean, if you're not a Christian and you think you know something about it, think again. So if you're the person who's had really bad experiences with religion or churches or even Christians, actually, forget about it, okay? I want to say I don't follow a church. I don't follow religion or a pastor. I'm actually not religious. Christianity is not essentially a moral religion, actually, although it has morals. If you want to know about Christianity, read about Jesus in the Gospels. Just read it. Read the Gospel of John, Mark. You can finish it in a couple of hours. Just read about Jesus, forget about Christians, read about Jesus, what he taught, how he acted, how he loved, how he led a sinless life, how humble he was. Okay, this is a real historic figure. It's been firmly established. He was tried by Pontius Pilate, crucified, and he did rise again. You might read it and think this is a load of nonsense, fine. But read it. Just decide for yourself. Don't let religion and man get in your way. Christianity is not a religion. It's a relationship with Jesus, with God. And here's the thing. God really does love you, no matter what you've done and who you are. He wants to share himself with you. And, he loves you so much, in fact, that he gave his son to die for your sins. So God is not a sky daddy. He's not a guy in the sky with a beard. It's important to have the correct understanding of God. Find out from the source documents, okay? Just read it. 2 hours, read it. And yeah, being a follower of Christ isn't easy. It can be a real struggle because you've got this battle with sin and stuff. But it's freedom. It's true freedom. And I'll just end by saying really quickly also for those who are out there they're praying for a family member or a friend, and if it looks hopeless, if you love them, don't give up. My mother was praying for me for 55 years, bless her. And I was, by all means, I was a lost cause. And I find out also that just after being saved, my sister, who regularly prayed for me anyway, had this real burden for me. And the week before my conversion, she was praying and fasting and crying her eyes out. So look, just keep praying and leave it to God. He'll take care of it. And that's it.
Thanks, Lewis. Well, I am praying, and you're not going to tell people you're fasting, but that's fasting is part of the journey when you're crying out for people that you care about who are making bad choices, and you're just longing for them to experience the amazing grace that you've experienced. And so thank you for being encouraging to me. I know you've encouraged many other people. Are you happy for me to put your email in the blurb if people want to be in touch with you?
Yeah, definitely. If anyone wants to be in touch or ask any questions, please do. And if I can't answer them, I'll put them on to someone that does know. Yeah.
Great. Maybe one day, those some more of the crazy stories that you couldn't share, you'll be allowed to share.
Yeah.
Because what an unbelievable sequence of stories that we have to edit out as part of the mix. But it's been beautiful hearing this, and I'm really grateful for your time. Thanks, Lewis. Bless you.
Thank you, Simon. It's been a pleasure.
Great, guys. Wonderful, isn't it? I'd love it if you've enjoyed this, which I know you have, to share it with people who you think will also want to hear it. They'll be encouraged and inspired. If you want to give us a great review, that would be appreciated on Spotify, iTunes. You can be in touch with me at simongilbert.com. And I want to thank, as always, Adam Thomas Steer for the editing, Mike Sandyman for the mixing. Next week, another fantastic story for another one of my mates, completely different because they're all different. And in the meantime, have a great week. God bless you, and toodaloo.